Hello and welcome back to Reading the Decades with me. Our area plunged from Tier 4 into lockdown over Christmas and it just feels like 2020 Part 2. Currently I'm seeking comfort in rereading and escapism in fantasy books. Before we talk about that, let's have a look at the other books that are still leftovers from December I haven't talked about yet. A really good book to understand what it means to be autistic is Al McNichol's A Kind of Spark. It is own voices and I felt so appropriately and authentically represented. The story follows autistic girl Eddie, who tries to get her village to acknowledge the witch hunts that have taken there hundreds and hundreds of years ago. We follow her struggles being bullied at school, making and maintaining friends, her families, and how she experiences the world around her. I love this book so much. It is very heartbreaking and very emotional. It made me cry and I can absolutely recommend it to every reader and everybody who's interested into finding out how autism can be experienced. Obviously this is only one representation and being autistic means also being very different from other autistic people, but I felt myself very well represented in this one and this is one of my new favourite books. Another heartbreaking book is Shoggy Buying by Douglas Stewart, mainly set in the 1980s in Glasgow. This is a gritty, dark, working class story about Shoggy Buying growing up with his family and especially his alcoholic mum. Although a very big book and sometimes a tiny bit repetitive to tell such a story, I absolutely enjoyed every page. I read this book right before Christmas, which is something that would never have happened before. This is a story I would have never read right up, or the days right up to Christmas, because this one does not really put you in the mood to be festive. The characters are so wonderfully lifelike. It's like they are your neighbours and you talk to them on a regular basis. There are scenes in this book that are culturally so universal. When those Scottish working class women came together, I sometimes felt reminded of experience of my own childhood from people that I observed, people that I knew, and I really marvelled at that because I would have never ever before compared those two together. And yeah, I absolutely loved this novel and it definitely deserved to win the Booker Prize. I watched it happen live and I was very happy about it. And I also think this cover represents the story 100%. That is a really good cover choice. Another recommendation is The Bookseller's Tale by Martin Latham. Another perfect book for bibliophiles. It takes the reader from the author's Canterbury Waterstones to the traditional booksellers of the Seine in Paris, through centuries of book trading to a whole part of New York City filled with bookshops. A very fascinating, sometimes a bit slow read to start the new year with, and this cover is absolutely amazing as well. And it just feels like Martin is a friend now. If you read this book, it just has this heartwarming feeling of getting to know a person, so much so that you would count them as your friend. The next time I go to the Canterbury Waterstones, I will absolutely love to get this book signed by him. For Christmas, I got this beast of a book, The Usborne History of Britain, which I read immediately. It's a beautifully illustrated massive history book for children, and I mainly wanted it for two reasons after I've seen it in the shops. Mainly because the illustrations are just absolutely gorgeous and I wanted to get a very quick brief and easy to understand overview of the history of Britain. This book serves me as a starting point. It gives me ideas on to what person or what event to investigate further and deepen my knowledge about. This book does have some inaccuracies and bothersome faults, but I enjoy it as much as my probably 8-year-old self would have enjoyed it. For my Jane Austen project, I finished Love and Friendship by Jane Austen, which is a collection of her teenage writings. You can definitely tell those are forebodings of the wonderful novels that are going to follow, written by Jane Austen. The stories are already witty and funny and cast an eye on the society Jane Austen grew up in. But because the themes repeated themselves again and again and again, this collection at the point became quite boring and cumbersome to read. It did not offer a great variation, which I don't think it intended to. And this criticism does not necessarily lower the quality of the stories. I also think her teenage writings were never intended to be published, so it was definitely an interesting read to understand Jane Austen's ideas and novels a bit better, to understand Jane Austen as a writer a lot more, and I would recommend it to anybody who maybe wants to get a little taste of Jane Austen, doesn't know if they want to commit to the novels yet, or to somebody who is already a very big fan of her novels and just can't get enough of her. This was my first time reading her teenage writings. I've read all of her novels, but I've never read this collection, and I'm glad I did so, but I don't think I'll ever reread the whole of it. I have some favourites in here which I think I'll definitely take another look at in the future, but the whole thing in one go is not a good idea in my opinion. Let's get into fantasy and my first DNF. Yes, I already did have a DNF in 2021 in January, and that was Garth Nick's The Left-Handed Booksellers of London. I was so excited for this book. It is a story that is set in the 80s in London, and we follow a young woman on the search for her father. While she's doing so, she gets muddled up in some magical business and meets some magical people. From the title, I expected a lot more bookish content, but the job of the bookseller mainly serves as a facade to hide something else. I also don't know why it's explicitly mentioned that it's set in the 80s, because there's nothing really specifically 80s about it. I've read half of it or 3/4 of it, so I did nearly finish it, but there was nothing really 80s about it, so it could have been set in every time basically. The only thing is that they didn't have mobile phones. This is not a bad book, and I liked a lot of Garth Nick's other works, but this was just not for me, mainly because I definitely had, from the title and from the description, lots and lots of different expectations. So before wasting my time on a story that does not satisfy me, I gave up, which I usually do not do, but I decided 2021 I don't want to waste my time on books that don't satisfy me. Another book that wasn't really my cup of tea is V.E. Schwab's The Neowitch. This is her debut novel. It got republished a few years ago. This is about a girl growing up in a very tiny village. One day a stranger appears and children start to get missing. I really enjoy Victoria Schwab's other novels, at least the ones that I've read so far, but this one just didn't read as fluent as the ones I've already read. I couldn't connect with the characters, couldn't understand their motivations, and overall I thought something was missing. There wasn't this great world building we are getting from her other books, so I don't know, it was just a bit flat. Back in December already, I read the first book in the Earthsea Quartet by Ursula K. Le Guin, A Wizard of Erzi. This is definitely not the last book I've read in this series. A Wizard of Erzi is about coming of age, finding your place in the world, friendship, ambition, failure, and facing yourself and your fears, and also your magic. There were some very predictable elements in the story which didn't bother me at all, to be honest. I really enjoyed this very typical traditional fantasy style the novel was written in, but I think I still have to get a bit more used to the pacing of those traditional fantasy writings. This was quite a short book and it covered a lot of time. A similar issue I had with Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This is the first book in the Farseer trilogy and the start of a very long series. We follow Fitz, the king's bastard, through his childhood and adolescent years at the court of the king. He gets trained in so many different things and faces so many life-changing challenges on not even 400 pages. I don't really know where this book left me. I did not like the protagonist, but I really enjoyed Robin Hobb's writing style. To me, this book seemed more like a prologue to this very long series. And I have to ask myself now, do I want to commit to read so many books, spend so many time and money on such a long series? Am I going to grow to like Fitz, or will I always be hesitant of liking him? I don't know yet. There are some beautifully illustrated editions out of the first and the second book so far, and I think I might switch from this paperback edition to those illustrated editions, because I think this story really deserves a very nice edition. The story has so much more to offer than you can put in this paperback. I also think this story has so much more to offer than just the first book. So I might give it another chance and see from there, and see after where I stand after reading the second book. There are two book series that helped me get through this third lockdown. I read The Hobbit when I was a child and absolutely loved it. I watched the Lord of the Rings films from the early 2000s and absolutely loved them. But I never read The Lord of the Rings for whatever reason. Now I finally made a start with The Fellowship of the Ring over the Christmas time, and I wanted to read the other two books probably over next Christmas. It was so lovely to be back in Middle-earth. Tolkien has such a talent to describe landscapes and create the absolute coziest of atmospheres. There are so many readings to The Lord of the Rings. You can experience and reread the story on so many levels. For my first reading, I chose plain escapism. I wanted to go on an adventure, on a journey. I wanted to travel, and I wanted to experience friendship and hope. And I think friendship and hope are the two words that describe The Lord of the Rings the best. I can't wait to finish the whole story, and I also can't wait to reread the book again and again and again, many more times during my life. This is a very big bind up of all the volumes, the books. I don't know how to name them, because how Tolkien intended for them to be published and how they were actually published in the end are two different things. It's a bit cumbersome to read this big book, I have to say. It's a bit hard to hold it up, it's quite heavy. So maybe I'm going to get another edition now that I know that I absolutely love it, and I think this is one of my favourite books of my whole life. The other series which I'm currently rereading is Harry Potter. It's now 20 years since I absolutely fell in love with the books, and they influenced my life so much and in so many ways. Over the years I've constantly reread my favourites, but never all 7 in one go. So far I've reread The Philosopher's Stone to The Goblet of Fire. And I think The Philosopher's Stone is the one that I've reread the most over the years. Closely followed by The Prisoner of Azkaban, which was my favourite for a very, very long time. I was never too fond of The Goblet of Fire, but rereading it this time I realised how good it actually is. It made me laugh so many more times than the other books, and obviously it also made me cry. It is such a breaking point in the series. The easy times are over, childhood is definitely over. And I can't remember rereading The Goblet of Fire too many times, so I discovered so many new things in this book actually. And I've never reread The Order of the Phoenix, The Half-Blood Prince and The Deathly Hallows, I think. So this is going to be a first for me. I've read them all on their release dates, but never since. I know that J.K. Rowling said absolutely nasty and unforgivable things that we do not need in the 21st century anymore. And if it weren't for my nostalgia, if it wasn't for me growing up with those books, I'm not sure actually if I would pick them up now. Let's say I was 20 years younger than I am. I don't think I would pick them up. But yeah, it's a comfort read for me, it's a nostalgic read for me. I actually studied some of them at university as well, and those books just mean so much to me reading wise. They made me as a reader and also as a person, and I have so much to say about them, and they gave me so much. And right now I'm really struggling with the third lockdown, and they just absolutely helped me get through this. I am also currently on my Kindle reading the All Souls trilogy by Deborah Harkness, better known as A Discovery of Witches. I'm currently reading the 3rd book. I finished the 1st and 2nd one. The series is about demons, witches and vampires. They are all on the hunt for a manuscript that holds the story of their origin. We follow witch Diana and vampire Matthew. We partly have an academic, bookish setting in Oxford, and the 2nd book is set in 1590, mainly in Elizabethan England. All those things totally sold me on this story, and this trilogy has been out for quite some time now, but it became made popular again with the TV series, and I got a really good offer for the Kindle series, or the Kindle edition of the series, so I thought why not try them as well, because they just sound fantastic. But oh, do I hate Matthew. He's so annoying, and I just wish he would have stayed in those past centuries he came from. Writing isn't brilliant either. There's so much unnecessary description and repetition of unnecessary actions and travelling. Then there is a very big event in the 2nd book we just brush over with 1 or 2 sentences. It just sometimes all feels like filling the pages with some irrelevant stuff. But the biggest annoyance, and this makes me really mad, and while I nearly stopped reading the books as well because of that, please, dear Deborah Harkness, dear editor, check your language. From time to time the characters speak in different languages. One of them is German and the translation is just rotten. Did you use Google Translate? I don't know, it reads like this. The sentences do not make any sense. The grammar is completely wrong. Why? Seriously, why? What is so hard to get like 10 sentences from English translated into the German? I get so mad over that because the whole series is also so, they're also pretentious, they're also, oh, we know everything, especially Matthew and all the other vampires. But then they can't even speak proper German. I do want to know how the series ends, and it has some moments that I do enjoy. It's a nice little read before I go to bed, before I go to sleep in the evening. So, I mean, I've come so far now. I'm going to finish it. Another book from my childhood is Lloyd Alexander's The Book of Three, a classic fantasy story from the 60s. This story follows assistant pig keeper Taran. He has to find a magic pig that is on the run and save his home and his people from the Horned King. This is an absolutely fast-paced, charming and funny story, and made me want to read a lot more middle grade, because I think middle grade is something we can all learn something from during this very dark time at the moment. So if you want to read some charming little middle grade classic fantasy story that is really funny, and sometimes you think this is so weird, this can't happen. I mean, a magic pig, it's so cute, isn't it? Yeah, I can highly recommend this one. And the last book is Donna Jo Napoli's The Wager. I read other books by the author a very long time ago and didn't come across her books as often as I would have liked to anymore. This one is a retelling of a Sicilian fairy tale. We follow Don Giovanni, who loses everything after a devastating earthquake and flooding and ends up poor. He strikes a deal with the devil to not wash or change his clothes for 3 years, 3 months and 3 days in exchange for a magical coin purse. I enjoyed this story very much. It's very short, very fast paced. I read it in one evening and I've never heard of that fairy tale before, so it was really nice to get introduced to something new. I really hope the author would get a bit more attention because her books are really, really good. This is everything I've read in the past few weeks. Currently I'm still rereading Harry Potter, as I've already mentioned, and I'm also still reading the last book of the All Souls trilogy. I have so many books waiting for me to be read, but at the moment I just don't have the brain capacity to experience new stories. I just need the stability and predictability of rereads, and that just helps me cope at the moment. So I hope you're all well. What do you read during this lockdown? Do you have any comfort reads that help you through this time? I hope to see you soon. Until then, happy reading.